The night she lost everything did not come with thunder or warning, came quietly, like a thief that already knew where the valuables were hidden. One moment she was standing in the doorway of a small wooden house with warm light behind her, and the next she was alone on a dirt road, the wind cutting through her thin coat, the past burning behind her like a fire she could never return to, if you have ever believed that fate only visits the lucky. This story will make you think again, because sometimes fate arrives when a soul is already broken, and it brings the one person you should fear and trust at the same time. Her name was Alara Crow, a woman shaped by loss and hardened by silence. The old American frontier had never been kind to women like her, women without family, without land, without protection. Towns whispered when she passed, not because she was dangerous, but because she carried pain, in her eyes the kind that made others uncomfortable. The railroads were pushing west, the law was thin as dust, and the land remembered blood more than mercy. Alara had once believed in simple things, a home, a promise, a future earned by honest work. All of it vanished in a single season, leaving her with nothing but a worn saddlebag and a heart that refused to heal. Before we go any further, if you enjoy deep emotional stories rooted in the old American West, stories of love, survival, and impossible trust, make sure you like this video and subscribe to the channel. This Western love story is brought to you by the channel Western Love Story, where every tale carries dust, danger, and destiny. Stay with me, because what happens next will stay with you long after the story ends. Alara walked west because there was nowhere else to go. The land stretched wide and unforgiving, painted in dry gold and endless sky. Every step away from the town felt like tearing a thread from her past. She did not look back. She had learned that looking back only slowed you down, and slow people did not survive long out here. The frontier was full of stories about women who vanished between towns, swallowed by distance and silence. Alara knew those stories. She had listened to them by lantern light, as she was walking straight into one. The people she met along the way offered little kindness. A shopkeeper with cold eyes warned her not to travel alone. A preacher spoke of sin and consequence. A ranch hand laughed and said the land would break her before winter did. None of them asked her name. None of them wanted to know why she was alone. In the Old West, survival often replaced compassion. The deeper she went, the more the world changed. Wooden fences disappeared. Roads turned into trails, then into nothing at all. Nights grew colder, and the silence heavier. It was in that silence that fear began to whisper. Not the loud fear of gunshots or shouting men, but the quiet fear that comes when you realize no one would hear you scream. That was when she heard the stories about him. They spoke of a man who moved like a shadow among the mesas and canyons. The last Apache who refused to bow, refused to vanish. Some called him a ghost. Others called him a killer. His name was Red Hawk Ironclaw, and it carried weight like a loaded rifle. Settlers claimed he watched from the ridges. Soldiers said he was smarter than any scout they had hunted. To most, he was a threat. To the land, he was something older, something rooted. Alara did not believe in legends, but she believed in instincts. And her instincts told her she was not alone. The first time she felt his presence, the air itself seemed to change. The wind shifted. Birds went silent. She stopped walking, her hand tightening around the strap of her bag. The horizon was empty, yet her skin prickled as if unseen eyes were measuring her worth. She told herself it was hunger, exhaustion, imagination. Still, she slept that night with a stone in her hand and her boots on her feet. Days passed. Her supplies ran low. Water became precious. Hope became fragile. Then came the moment when fate stopped being a word and became a living thing. She collapsed near a dry wash, her body finally giving in to thirst and heat. The sun burned above her, merciless and bright. In her fading awareness, she saw boots that were not boots at all, soft steps on dust, careful and controlled. She smelled smoke and sage. Strong hands lifted her, not rough, not gentle, but certain. When Alara woke, she was not dead. She lay beneath a rough shelter of branches. Fire crackled nearby, and across from her sat a man whose presence filled the space like a storm held back by iron will. His hair was dark and long, tied with leather. His face was marked by time and battle, not with scars alone, but with something deeper, something watchful. His eyes were sharp, ancient, and impossible to read. This was no ghost. This was Red Hawk Ironclaw. Every story she had heard rushed back at once. Every warning, every fear. She tried to move, but her body was weak. He did not touch her again, only watched, as if waiting to see whether she would run, or fight, or break. She realized then the cruel truth. Fate had not led her to safety. Fate had led her to the last man she should have trusted. Red Hawk spoke little, but when he did, his voice was calm and low, like distant thunder. He told her she was dying when he found her. He told her the land does not forgive weakness, but it respects will. He did not ask her why she was alone. He did not offer promises. Simply said she could stay until she was strong enough to leave. Ilara did not know whether to feel grateful or terrified. As days passed, an uneasy balance formed. He hunted. She recovered. Silence filled the spaces between them, thick with unspoken questions. She noticed how he never wasted movement, how he treated the land as something alive. She noticed how he watched the horizon, even while resting, as if danger was always near. And he noticed her too. Her resilience, her quiet strength, her refusal to beg. But the world beyond the shelter was closing in. Soldiers were moving through the territory. Settlers wanted blood for fear. And trust between a broken woman and a hunted Apache was a fragile thing, easily shattered. Ilara stood one evening at the edge of the firelight, staring into the dark. She knew that staying meant danger and leaving meant death. She also knew that the man behind her carried secrets as heavy as her own losses. She did not yet understand why fate had crossed their paths, only that once crossed, there was no turning back. And somewhere beyond the ridge, forces were already moving, ready to test whether trust could survive where everything else had failed. The fire burned low that night, throwing slow shadows against the rocks. Ilara sat with her knees drawn close, listening to the wind slide through the canyon like a warning whispered too late. Red Hawk Ironclaw sharpened a blade across from her, the soft scrape of stone against metal steady and calm. Neither spoke. Words felt dangerous here, as if saying the wrong one could shatter the fragile balance that kept them both alive. As her strength returned, so did her memories. In the quiet hours before sleep, the past crept back with sharp edges. She remembered the farm she once called home, the cracked porch, the smell of rain on dry soil. She remembered the man who promised protection and delivered betrayal instead. When the land dispute turned violent, he chose survival over loyalty, leaving her to face the ruin alone. By the time the law arrived, there was nothing left to save. No house, no justice. Only whispers that followed her out of town like shadows that never tired. Red Hawk did not ask about her scars, visible or hidden. He watched her the way a hunter watches weather, not judging, only reading signs. That silence unsettled her more than questions ever could. Most men filled quiet with control or threat. He filled it with patience. On the third morning, he handed her a small carved cup filled with water gathered before dawn. Their fingers brushed for a brief moment. His skin was warm, calloused, real. The stories had painted him as something monstrous, but monsters did not move with such restraint. Still, she reminded herself that danger often wore calm faces. They traveled deeper into the territory as she grew stronger. Red Hawk said soldiers were near, moving with purpose and fear. Fear made men careless. Careless men made the land bleed. Ilara noticed signs she would have missed before. Broken twigs placed deliberately. Stones stacked in patterns that meant nothing to her but everything to him. This was his world, and she was an outsider walking its narrow edge. One afternoon, they paused near a ridge overlooking a long valley. Smoke curled faintly in the distance. Red Hawk's expression hardened, his jaw setting like stone. He spoke one word, heavy with meaning. Bluecoats. Ilara felt her stomach tighten. She had trusted the law once. That trust had cost her everything. As they watched from above, she saw movement below. Soldiers riding in a loose formation, rifles slung, eyes scanning the land as if it were an enemy. At their head rode a man with a broad frame and a hard posture, his coat darker than the others. Red Hawk's gaze followed him closely. "That one," he said quietly. Iron Voss. The name carried weight, even to Ilara. She had heard it spoken in towns with a mix of respect and fear. Captain Iron Voss was known for bringing order to wild places, no matter the cost. He believed the frontier needed to be broken before it could be tamed. And he believed men like Red Hawk Ironclaw were obstacles, not people. Alara understood then that she was standing between two worlds that could never truly meet. The old ways and the new laws were grinding against each other, and she was caught in the middle, whether she wanted to be or not. They moved again before dusk, taking paths that twisted through stone and brush.
Ow.
Red Hawk showed her how to walk without leaving clear tracks, how to listen for the land's warnings. Every lesson felt like a thread pulling her further from the life she had known, and deeper into something uncertain and dangerous. That night, as they camped beneath a sky thick with stars, Alara finally spoke. She asked him why he stayed, why he did not vanish deeper into the mountains, where no one would find him. Red Hawk looked toward the fire, his eyes reflecting the flames. "This land remembers," he said. "If I leave, it forgets who I am. If it forgets, then I am already gone." His words stayed with her long after the fire burned down. She realized then that he was not just fighting soldiers or settlers. He was fighting erasure. The days that followed, tension tightened like a rope drawn too far. They heard distant gunfire once, echoing through the canyons. Another time they found fresh tracks circling an old water source. Someone was searching, and not carefully. Alara's presence complicated everything. Otto, Red Hawk, knew it. She knew it. A lone Apache could slip through shadows. Otto, especially one known to settlers, was a liability. Yet he never suggested leaving her behind. That choice confused her more than any threat. One evening they encountered an old trader named Ashen Cole, a man with sharp eyes and a limp earned in a forgotten skirmish. He recognized Alara at once. His gaze flicked between her and Red Hawk, calculation evident. "Worlds turning crueler by the day," Ashen Cole muttered. "People hunting what they fear, calling it justice." He warned them that Iron Voss had orders to make an example, that patience was running thin back east. Treaties meant nothing now. Lara felt the weight of those. Words settled deep in her chest. She was no longer just running from her past. She was walking straight into a future soaked in conflict. When Ashen Cole left, Red Hawk grew even quieter. Alara sensed a decision forming behind his steady eyes, something he had not yet shared. It frightened her, not because she doubted his strength, but because she feared the cost of whatever choice he would make. At night, she dreamed of fire and open plains, of hands reaching for her and pulling away at the last moment. She woke once to find Red Hawk standing guard, his silhouette framed by moonlight, his attention fixed on the darkness beyond. In that moment, she wondered if fate had not led her to him by accident, but as a test of something neither of them fully understood. Trust grew slowly, painfully, like a wound learning to close. But just beneath it, danger waited, patient and hungry. Somewhere beyond the hills, Iron Voss was closing the distance. Somewhere within herself, Alara felt the pull of a choice she was not yet ready to make. And the land, old and unforgiving, watched them both. Waiting to see who would survive what was coming next, the dawn came cold and quiet, painting the canyons in muted gold and gray. Lara stirred before the sun, feeling the stiff ache of muscles still adjusting to a body that had been broken once and now tested again. Red Hawk Ironclaw was already awake, crouched near the fire, scanning the distant horizon as if reading a language only he could understand. His presence was steady, but the tension radiating from him was impossible to ignore. Every small movement, every shifting shadow seemed to carry meaning, and she was learning fast that in his world, nothing was wasted. They moved with purpose, following a narrow trail through broken rock and scrub. Red Hawk spoke little, letting silence carry the weight between them. Alara thought about the soldiers they had seen Iron Voss and his men. The thought of confrontation made her stomach tighten. She was not a fighter in the way he was, not trained to read the land like a map. She was learning, slowly, each step a lesson in patience and survival, each glance a measure of the dangers that surrounded them. Yet she also knew that whatever came next, there would be no turning back. The lawless lands of the frontier did not forgive hesitation. They came to a shallow creek mid-morning, water clear but cold. Red Hawk knelt, cupped the water, and drank before offering it to her. His eyes did not meet hers. She had long since learned that with him, questions were dangerous. Not at her. "Why do they hunt you?" She asked softly, "Why would the law send men after someone who only wants to be left alone?" He paused, letting the question hang in the air. "'Cause men fear what they cannot control," he finally said, his voice low, carrying the weight of years spent dodging death and betrayal. "And because fear makes them cruel." Ilara wanted to argue, to remind him that some men were not cruel, that some still remembered mercy, but she stopped herself. She had learned that in this world, words were often wasted on the wrong ears. The landscape shifted as they continued. Tall cliffs gave way to open plains where the wind carried whispers of the past. Red Hawk pointed out markers along the trail, broken branches, disturbed stones, footprints that told of soldiers moving close. Every observation deepened Ilara's respect for him and her own unease. She understood, finally, that survival here was as much about reading the world as it was about strength or skill. By evening, they arrived at a hidden hollow that Red Hawk called home. A natural shelter, half cave and half timber, surrounded by thick brush and rock formations. The place felt alive, as if the land itself was keeping watch. Inside, the air was cooler, tinged with the smell of sage and smoke. Red Hawk moved with careful familiarity, arranging supplies, checking traps, and tending to the fire. Ilara followed, quietly observing, feeling both the comfort of shelter and the pressing weight of unseen threats. The first night in the hollow, tension lingered like the smoke from the fire. Red Hawk stayed alert, listening to distant noises, his body moving with the grace of someone who had survived 100 ambushes. Ilara lay awake, thinking about the soldiers, about Iron Voss, about the promises and betrayals that had brought her to this point. She realized that danger was never far, and trust was a fragile, precious thing in this place. The following days introduced new challenges. Ilara had to learn to hunt small game, to move quietly, to observe the landscape for subtle signs of danger. Red Hawk guided her patiently, correcting mistakes with quiet authority. One afternoon, while tracking rabbits near a rocky outcrop, they found evidence that soldiers had passed that way recently. Broken twigs, disturbed dirt, a discarded glove. Red Hawk's eyes darkened, and he muttered something in his own tongue, a warning that tightened Ilara's chest with fear. "You see," he said finally, voice calm but tense, "they are close." The realization settled over her like a stone. Every step forward carried risk. Every shadow could hide a threat. Every sound could mean pursuit. She began to feel the weight of being hunted, not just for herself, but for Red Hawk as well. In the quiet moments, Red Hawk's past emerged slowly through small fragments, stories of skirmishes, of battles fought for survival, of allies lost to betrayal or death. Ilara listened, absorbing the layers of his life without asking too many questions. He did not offer details willingly. Trust had to be earned, and she was learning its slow rhythm. Yet each story added depth to the man she had once feared, revealing a complexity behind the legend that neither the settlers nor the soldiers had understood. One evening, as the sun dipped behind jagged cliffs, they spotted a distant campfire. Soldiers clearly moving with purpose and intent. Red Hawk did not move immediately. He observed, noting the number, the formation, the direction of approach. Ilara felt the familiar knot of fear, but also something new, a sense of urgency that made every decision count. "We cannot wait," he said finally, his voice quiet but decisive. "They will not give us the chance to choose later." Ilara realized then that the stakes had grown beyond her own survival. Every choice she made, every step she took, mattered not just for her, but for Red Hawk as well. Their fates were now intertwined, caught in a dangerous dance with forces neither of them fully controlled. Red Hawk taught her to read more than tracks. He showed her how to listen for patterns in the wind, for the subtle signs of human presence, for the way the earth itself spoke of movement. Ilara absorbed it all, slowly, understanding that in this world knowledge was as lethal as a rifle, which also learned the importance of patience, of restraint, of holding back until the exact right moment. Yet as they moved through the plains, danger was never far. A sudden storm forced them to take shelter in a shallow ravine, lightning splitting the sky in violent streaks. Thunder rolled across the canyon, echoing through the rocks. Ilara shivered, but Red Hawk's calm steadied her. The storm brought more than rain, revealed tracks they had missed before. Soldiers had passed through recently, leaving a trail that promised confrontation soon. Tension mounted with each passing day. The soldiers were relentless. Iron Voss, determined to assert control, moved like a shadow across the land, his presence a constant threat. Alara began to understand the broader conflict, not just survival, but the clash of two worlds. One world clung to ancient knowledge, to the rhythms of the land, to honor and patience. The other moved with law and order, with unyielding rules, with a vision that left little room for mercy. Red Hawk's vigilance never wavered, but Alara could sense the strain in him. There were moments when his jaw tightened, when his hands clenched, when his eyes flicked to the horizon with a mixture of calculation and worry. She realized then that the stories she had heard about him of unyielding strength and deadly precision were only half the truth. The other half was vulnerability, buried beneath decades of survival. Their journey also revealed unexpected allies. An old woman named Maris Hale, living in a hidden canyon, offered them food and warning. Her knowledge of the terrain rivaled Red Hawk's, and she spoke of soldiers with a mixture of fear and defiance. "They take what they cannot understand," she said quietly. "But the land will remember who belongs." Alara sensed in Maris a reflection of herself, someone who had survived betrayal and loss, who knew the cost of misjudgment, who understood that danger was never abstract. Despite these small victories, tension continued to rise. Every night the distant drum of soldiers' movement grew louder, closer. Iron Voss was relentless, strategic, and willing to sacrifice anything to assert control. Red Hawk's careful planning was tested at every turn, forcing both of them into constant vigilance. Alara understood that the coming days would demand everything she had learned, and more. In the quiet hours, she also began to notice small changes in Red Hawk. A glance lingered longer than necessary. A subtle gesture that revealed concern, perhaps even something approaching trust. She realized that the connection between them was more than convenience. It was survival, and it was fragile. One misstep could shatter it, and the consequences would be deadly. The land itself became another character in their journey. Canyons, cliffs, and plains spoke in ways only Red Hawk fully understood. Alara learned to listen, to anticipate, to move with caution. Every tree, every rock, every whisper of wind held meaning. The frontier was not just a backdrop. It was alive, and it demanded respect, attention, and fear. As they settled in for another night, the fire casting long shadows against the rocks, Alara felt the full weight of their situation. The soldiers were near. The law was coming. Her past had already tried to destroy her, and now the present threatened to finish the task. Yet in Red Hawk's quiet strength, in the way he moved and watched and waited, she found the smallest spark of hope, a chance that survival was still possible, if they could outthink, outmaneuver, and endure. But the tension would not ease. The next move would decide everything, and neither Alara nor Red Hawk could see it coming. Somewhere beyond the hills, Iron Voss and his men were closing in, their orders clear, their intentions ruthless. The fragile trust between a broken woman and the last Apache man hung by a thread, ready to be tested against the harshest forces of the frontier. And in that moment, under a sky heavy with stars and shadow, Alara understood that the story of survival, of trust, of danger, was only beginning. The land watched. Fate waited. And the next choice could change everything. The sun had barely risen when Alara awoke, to the sharp hiss of wind cutting through the canyon. The air smelled of smoke, dry earth, and something unfamiliar, something that made her heart tighten. Red Hawk Ironclaw was already awake, crouched low on the ridge above the hollow, eyes scanning every shadow. He did not speak, but the tenseness in his posture was enough to tell her that the soldiers were closer than ever. Alara dressed quickly, her fingers trembling with a mix of cold and anticipation. Every movement felt amplified, every sound sharper. She had learned to listen to the land, to read it like an old story written in stone and dust, and today it spoke of urgency and danger. Red Hawk motioned for her to follow silently, leading her along a narrow path hidden among jagged rocks and thorny brush. The plains below were alive with movement. Dust swirled around the mounted soldiers, their uniforms sharp, rifles glinting in the morning light. Alara recognized Iron Voss, immediately the commanding figure at the front, scanning for threats with calculated precision. He moved like a storm in human form, relentless and unavoidable. Every instinct in her told her that the coming hours would be decisive. They paused behind a ridge that offered a perfect vantage point. Red Hawk gestured for her to stay low, his eyes scanning the soldiers' formation. "They are more than hunters," he said quietly. "They are trackers, and their orders are clear. They will not leave without results." Elara swallowed hard. She had felt hunted before, but this was different. This was strategy, intelligence, and unyielding determination combined. The soldiers were not just a threat to Red Hawk, they were a threat to everything she had left. Every lesson she had learned, every ounce of courage she had rebuilt would be tested. They moved slowly, inch by inch, following the soldiers from a safe distance. Red Hawk showed her how to anticipate patterns, the way the wind carried scent, the subtle cues of disturbed brush, the cadence of hoofbeats on stone. Elara absorbed it all, each lesson heightening her awareness, each step building the tension that tightened in her chest like a vice. By midday, the soldiers had reached a clearing near an old ridge. Red Hawk motioned for her to take cover behind a boulder. From their vantage point, they could see every movement, every gesture, every indication that Iron Voss was planning something. The air felt electric, as if the land itself had recognized the coming confrontation. Alara's pulse raced. She had grown stronger, more capable, but fear still lingered. It was a quiet fear, different from panic, sharpened her senses, forced her to notice details that would have escaped her before. She realized that survival depended not just on skill, but on timing, on patience, on reading the battlefield before it unfolded. Red Hawk spoke, low and precise. "We have to make them believe the land itself will swallow us." His words carried more than strategy. They carried history. The weight of a lifetime spent surviving in a world that never forgave mistakes. They will expect weakness. We will give them none. The soldiers below moved closer to their trap, unaware of the eyes watching them. Iron Voss's strategy was methodical, but Red Hawk's knowledge of the terrain gave them an advantage few could anticipate. Elara noticed how he calculated every risk, every shadow, every possible escape route. It was tense, almost unbearable, but she trusted his instincts. As the afternoon sun dipped lower, a sudden movement caught their attention. One of Iron Voss's scouts had split from the main group, moving toward a narrow pass that Red Hawk had considered their fallback point. The danger was immediate. If the scout discovered their shelter, the advantage would be lost. Red Hawk's face hardened. "We move now," he said, and for the first time in days Elara saw urgency in his eyes. They descended carefully, using every crevice and shadow to stay hidden. Her muscles burned from the strain, but adrenaline drove her forward, each step precise, each breath measured. They reached a narrow canyon that offered cover from the scouts. Red Hawk motioned for her to stay low while he slipped ahead, moving silently like a shadow merging with darkness. Minutes stretched, each one heavier than the last. Elara held her breath, listening to distant hoofbeats, her mind racing through every scenario. Suddenly, a sharp cry echoed from the ridge above. One of the soldiers had spotted something, or perhaps sensed it. Dust kicked up in the distance, and the tension in the air became almost physical. Elara's heart pounded, but she did not move. She could feel Red Hawk's presence behind her, steady, guiding, protective. Moments later, Red Hawk returned, signaling her to move. "We have no choice," he said. "They are closing the circle." Every instinct screamed that confrontation was inevitable. They moved deeper into the canyon, Red Hawk leading with precise, fluid steps, Elara following with quiet determination. By evening, they reached a secluded grove where a small stream cut through the rocky terrain. The place was hidden, but not for long. Red Hawk's eyes scanned the horizon. Smoke curled faintly in the distance, soldiers moving closer. Iron Voss was methodical, relentless. The tension tightened around them like a vice. Elara knew that tonight would test everything she had learned. Every lesson in survival, every shred of courage, every ounce of trust in Red Hawk would be needed. She looked at him, noticing the subtle signs of strain, the way his hands tightened around his bow, the alertness in his posture. He was preparing for what might be the final test before the confrontation. Night fell, dark and oppressive. Stars glimmered faintly through gaps in the canopy, offering little comfort. The soldiers were near. Their movements were coordinated, purposeful, every step a threat. Lara felt the weight of inevitability pressing down. Red Hawk whispered instructions, teaching her how to use the terrain to their advantage. They set traps, prepared diversions, and positioned themselves with careful precision. Every shadow, every rock, every bend in the stream became part of their strategy. Ilara realized that their survival depended on ingenuity, courage, and an unwavering focus. Hours passed, the quiet tension broken only by the occasional rustle of leaves or the distant bark of a horse. The soldiers were closer, their presence a constant reminder that failure was not an option. Ilara felt the adrenaline sharpen every sense, every instinct honed to a razor's edge. Then came a sudden movement. Horse's hoofs struck stone too loudly, echoing through the grove. Ilara froze, heart in her throat. Red Hawk's hand went to her shoulder, steadying her. "Stay calm," he whispered. "Trust the land. Trust me." The soldiers' approach accelerated, their search methodical and relentless. Iron Voss was visible now, a dark figure against the night, scanning for signs, determined to assert control. Ilara realized that the next moments would decide everything: the fragile trust, the survival, the chance to turn the tide. Red Hawk signaled her, and they moved with fluid precision, stepping into positions that gave them advantage without revealing their presence. The tension was unbearable, the air thick with anticipation. Every movement of the soldiers was mirrored by calculated responses from Red Hawk. Every instinct, every lesson, every ounce of courage Ilara had gathered was being tested. Hours stretched like eternity as the soldiers closed in, unaware that they were walking into a carefully orchestrated trap. Ilara's heart raced, fear and determination intertwined. She understood the stakes. This was more than survival. This was proving that trust and courage could prevail, even against overwhelming odds. Red Hawk's eyes met hers briefly, a silent acknowledgement of the bond that had formed between them. They were no longer just a hunted woman and a solitary Apache. They were partners in survival, connected by shared danger and unspoken understanding. The soldiers were nearly upon them. The traps were set, the diversions ready. The land itself seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the moment when the confrontation would erupt, when strategy and courage would collide with relentless force. Ilara felt the tension rise to its peak. Every sense was alive, every thought focused, every instinct screaming. The night was alive with danger, the air thick with anticipation. They were on the edge of something that could change everything, a climax that would test every skill, every lesson, every bond they had built. And in that moment, as the shadows lengthened and the soldiers closed in, Ilara knew that the next decision, the next movement, could decide not just their survival, but the shape of their future. The land waited, silent and watchful. Fate hung in the balance. And the story, their story, was about to reach the point where courage, trust, and destiny collided. The first shot rang out, sharp and sudden, cutting through the still night like a jagged lightning strike. Dust and leaves swirled as Red Hawk Ironclaw moved with silent precision, his body a shadow among the rocks, every motion calculated, every breath controlled. Ilara followed, crouched low, feeling the pulse of the earth beneath her boots, feeling the weight of every lesson, every survival skill honed over weeks of constant vigilance. They were ready not just to survive, but to turn the tables on the hunters who had chased them relentlessly. The soldiers moved into the clearing, unaware of the traps that had been set, unaware of the terrain that was as much Red Hawk's ally as he was its master. Iron Voss barked orders, sharp and commanding, his voice carrying over the night. Spread out, no shortcuts. Search every inch. But even his experience could not overcome the advantage Red Hawk had earned through patience, strategy, and intimate knowledge of the land. Ilara's hands trembled slightly as she readied herself, but Red Hawk's presence beside her steadied her nerves. She had been broken once, left to survive a world that offered no mercy, and now she was discovering strength she had never known. Strength born from trust, from determination, from the knowledge that running was no longer the only option. The first wave of soldiers stepped into a narrow ravine, triggering a subtle trap that sent a cloud of dust and pebbles into the air. Confusion spread among them as Red Hawk's calculated movements struck from unexpected angles, disorienting, precise. He moved like the wind, unseen and unstoppable, directing Alara in whispered instructions, guiding her through the chaos. Each decision was critical. Every second counted. Alara found herself in a rhythm with him, their movements synchronized. Trust forming a silent bond stronger than any words could create. The fear that had haunted her for so long was still there, but it was tempered now by focus and resolve. She had survived betrayal, loss, and isolation. And now she was part of something bigger, part of a force that refused to be broken. Iron Voss realized the hunters were being outmaneuvered, frustration flashing across his face. He signaled a retreat, trying to regroup, but Red Hawk anticipated every step, controlling the land with precision. By the time the soldiers recovered, the tactical advantage had shifted completely. Alara watched as the fear that had once been hers now reflected in the enemy. Their confidence cracking under the weight of the unseen, unstoppable force they were facing. As the confrontation drew to its peak, Red Hawk and Alara moved to higher ground, the wind carrying the distant shouts of retreating soldiers. The night was thick with tension, but victory, quiet and controlled, hung in the air. The danger had not vanished, but it had been redirected, and in that redemptive moment, Alara felt a sense of power she had never imagined. She was no longer just a victim of fate, she was a part of shaping it. They descended into the clearing once the soldiers had scattered, moving among the remnants of chaos. Broken branches, disturbed soil, discarded weapons, traces of fear left behind. Alara noticed how Red Hawk treated the land with respect even in victory, how he checked the environment for survivors, how he ensured no unnecessary harm was done. It was a lesson in balance, in honor, in the understanding that survival was not just about triumph, but about preserving what mattered. In the quiet that followed, Red Hawk finally allowed himself to relax, though only slightly. He looked at Alara with an intensity that conveyed more than gratitude, conveyed recognition. "You did well," he said, voice low but steady. "You were brave. You were steady. You are not the same woman who walked these canyons weeks ago." Alara nodded, feeling the truth of his words settle in her chest. She had been broken once, lost to a world that offered nothing but betrayal and hardship. Now she had survived against odds that would have crushed most. She had learned courage, patience, trust, and the power of perseverance. She had discovered the strength to reclaim her life in a world that often seemed designed to take it away. The following days brought quiet, reflective moments. They returned to the hidden grove, tending to small tasks, gathering food, and rebuilding a sense of routine. Alara found herself observing Red Hawk in new ways, not just as a protector or teacher, but as someone with depth, history, and quiet humanity. He was not merely a legend. He was a man shaped by survival, by choice, by enduring loss and carrying the weight of the frontier with dignity. Alara also began to notice the subtle ways he respected her independence, encouraging her to move, to act, to think for herself. There was a balance between guidance and freedom, a silent acknowledgement that she was no longer merely a follower, but a partner in their shared journey. Trust, hard-won and fragile, had blossomed into something tangible, unspoken, yet undeniable. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the canyon walls in deep gold, Alara spoke. "I used to believe that the world was finished with me, that I had no chance to rebuild." She paused, watching the wind stir the leaves. "Now I see. Survival is more than living. It's choosing, even when the choice is hard." Red Hawk did not reply immediately, simply stood beside her, watching the horizon, the weight of past battles lingering in his posture. Finally, he spoke, voice quiet but carrying conviction. "The land gives second chances, if you are willing to earn them. You have earned yours." The recognition hit her with a quiet power. She had survived betrayal, outsmarted relentless danger, and faced the wilderness with courage. More importantly, she had discovered that trust, once rebuilt, could be stronger than any weapon, more protective than any shield. In the following weeks, they traveled carefully, returning to areas where danger had once been immediate, now patrolled and secured. They helped settlers caught in the crossfire, shared knowledge with those who respected the land, and quietly restored balance where chaos had threatened to take hold. Alara saw how actions, small and deliberate, could ripple through a community, restoring hope even in the harshest landscapes. Maris Hale visited them once more, bringing food and news. She spoke of the frontiers slowly settling, of soldiers redirected to other tasks, of communities learning to respect the land as much as they feared it. Her eyes held pride as she looked at Alara and Red Hawk, as if seeing the embodiment of resilience and courage in two people who had weathered storms few could imagine. Alara began to feel the quiet stirrings of hope she had thought impossible. The fear that had been her constant companion loosened its grip. She was no longer alone. She was no longer broken in ways that could not be healed. With Red Hawk, she had found safety, understanding, and the promise that even in a world as harsh as the frontier, trust and courage could create a future worth embracing. One morning, as the light spread across the canyon walls, Red Hawk and Alara rode together along a ridge overlooking the valley. The air was crisp, the horizon wide and full of possibility. They had survived, yes, but more importantly, they had grown. Their bond, forged through danger and tempered by trust, carried a strength neither had anticipated. Alara glanced at Red Hawk, noting the calm determination in his eyes, the silent reassurance of his presence. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked softly. "All of this, the risk, the danger, the choices we've made?" He shook his head slowly. "Regret is for those who forget. We remember, we learn, we survive. And in surviving, we find what we were meant to become." Alara smiled, a small but genuine expression that carried the weight of everything she had endured. The land stretched before them, vast and untamed, yet somehow welcoming. For the first time in years, she felt not fear, but possibility. The frontier had tested her, threatened her, pushed her to the edge, but it had also given her strength, companionship, and a renewed sense of purpose. Together they rode on, the wind carrying the scent of sage and earth, the horizon wide with promise. The story of a woman once alone and broken, of the last Apache man she should have feared but learned to trust, had reached a point of resolution, not in the absence of danger, but in the triumph of courage, trust, and resilience. Alara had lost everything once, and fate had brought her to Red Hawk Ironclaw. Through the trials, the fear, and the relentless pursuit, she had discovered something far greater than survival. She had found strength, hope, and the knowledge that even in a world shaped by hardship, trust could bloom, courage could triumph, and a future could be claimed, one deliberate step at a time. The canyon was quiet, save for the wind whispering through rocks and trees. Carrying the echoes of battles past and the promise of days to come, Alara and Red Hawk rode side by side, not merely survivors but partners. A testament to the resilience of the human spirit and the power of trust in a world that often demanded everything, yet offered the possibility of everything in return. As the sun climbed higher, painting the valley in light, Alara knew that though challenges would come again, the bond forged through hardship would carry her forward. She had walked through darkness and fear, yet here she was, whole, trusted, and unbroken. And in that, she found the happiness she had thought lost forever. A quiet, enduring victory that no shadow could ever take away. In the vastness of the frontier, where the past and present collided, where danger and destiny intertwined, Alara and Red Hawk had carved a place of their own, a place where survival met trust. Courage met hope, and the story of two souls once broken found the strength to rise together,